The scent of pine and cinnamon usually filled our home with warmth, but that Christmas Eve, it felt like a thin veil over something cold and calculating. My husband, Julian, sat across from me at the antique mahogany table, his smile as polished as the silver before him. Outside, Aspen was a postcard of falling snow, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. I had invited him here, to our mountain retreat, for what he believed was a festive reconciliation. In truth, it was a carefully laid trap, the culmination of 9 months of watching, waiting, and meticulously dismantling the elaborate lie that had been our life. To understand how I got to that moment, you need to go back to a rainy Tuesday in March. My parents, Robert and Catherine Sterling, had died 2 months prior in a plane crash over the Adirondacks. Their loss was a seismic event, not just emotionally, but professionally. Overnight, I became the CEO of Sterling Architecture Group, a multi-million-dollar firm, and the trustee of a revocable trust fund my parents had established for my younger sister, Clara. Clara, 19, had been receiving specialized treatment in Zurich for a condition requiring continuous, high-level care. That trust fund wasn't just money. It was the architecture of her future, a promise of stability my parents had spent decades building. And now, it was my responsibility to protect it. I was barely keeping my head above water, navigating grief, a demanding company, and the dizzying weight of sudden responsibility. Julian, my husband of 5 years, seemed to be my anchor. He was always there, offering a steady hand, a comforting word, or so I thought. That Tuesday evening, he sat me down at our kitchen table in our Manhattan penthouse, his hand covering mine. "Evelyn," he began, his voice tender, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it, without getting upset." My stomach tightened. An instinct I couldn't name yet, a primal alertness, went still inside me. "I'm listening," I said, my voice betraying none of the sudden unease. "You're not okay," he continued, his thumb tracing slow circles on my knuckles, a gesture I'd always found soothing, but that night felt calibrated. "I know you think you are. I know that's what you tell everyone, but I've been watching you these past 2 months. The way you push through every single day. The way you won't let anyone near enough to help you. And it frightens me. Evelyn, you've lost both your parents. You're running a company that would test someone twice your age and twice your experience, and you are trying to hold every single piece of it together entirely by yourself." He squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do that. I'm managing," I insisted, though the words felt hollow even to me. "You're barely sleeping," he countered, leaning forward, his eyes filled with what looked, from every external angle, exactly like genuine concern. "I've been talking to the board. They're worried about the stress you're under. The company needs a steady hand, Evelyn. Someone who can take the reins while you recover." My mind, trained to spot the hairline fractures in ancient canvases, the false varnishes, the single brushstroke that didn't belong, suddenly saw a pattern forming. The words "take the reins" echoed in my head. "What exactly are you suggesting, Julian?" He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile. "A temporary leave of absence. Just a few months. Let me step in as interim CEO. I can handle the day-to-day, manage the immediate pressures. You can focus on healing, on yourself, and on Clara's trust. It's a complex instrument, and with everything else on your plate, it's easy to overlook details." The air in the room seemed to chill. My parents had been meticulous. The trust was designed to be ironclad, a fortress around Clara's future. The idea that Julian, a man with no legal or financial background beyond his vague consulting work, would manage it, sent a shiver down my spine. "The trust is fine," I said, my voice flat. "My parents designed it to be self-executing." "Of course," he conceded, "but interpretation can be tricky. There are clauses, I'm sure, that require careful handling. Especially with your parents gone, I could help you navigate that." It was then that I saw it. Not a hairline fracture, but a gaping tear in the canvas of my marriage. The concern in his eyes, the tenderness in his voice, the perfectly calibrated touch. It was all a performance. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to seize what my parents had left behind. "I am Evelyn Sterling, And I am not just the CEO of a major architecture firm. I am also a certified art restoration specialist with a documented talent for identifying forgeries that have fooled every other expert in the room. And I realized with a cold and absolute precision that my marriage was not what I had believed it to be. Julian was a forgery, and he was coming for everything. I didn't react. I couldn't. My parents had taught me patience, the kind that allows you to hold a painting at precisely the right angle to a raking light source, unmoving, until the truth reveals itself. I simply nodded, feigning exhaustion. Perhaps you're right, Julian. I am so tired. He beamed, his eyes alight with a triumph he thought was hidden. I knew you'd see sense, darling. We'll get through this, together. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I began to watch. I watched Julian with the same professional-grade attention I brought to a damaged work of art. Methodical, unhurried, building toward a conclusion I could not afford to reach prematurely. My first call was to Daniel Cross, a forensic accountant I'd met through my father's art world connections. Daniel was a quiet man, unassuming, but with a mind like a steel trap. He specialized in untangling complex financial webs, often for high-stakes art fraud cases. I need you to look into something for me, Daniel, I told him, keeping my voice neutral. My husband's finances, everything, and the Sterling family trust. I want to know if there's any way it could be compromised. Daniel's investigation began subtly, a ghost in the financial systems. Within weeks, the first cracks appeared. Julian, it turned out, had significant gambling debts, primarily from high-stakes games in Macau and Hong Kong. Debts he had meticulously hidden from me, debts that far exceeded his declared income. His consulting work was a front, a thin veneer over a life of reckless speculation. Then came the bombshell regarding the trust. My parents had indeed made it ironclad, but there was a loophole, a tiny, almost invisible clause that Julian had somehow discovered. It allowed for the temporary transfer of trustee duties under specific circumstances, such as incapacitation or severe mental distress of the primary trustee, me. His concern for my well-being, his insistence on my recovery, was a direct play for this clause. If he could convince the board, or even a sympathetic judge, that I was unfit, he could gain control. And with control, he could access Clara's future. The thought made me physically ill. Clara, so vulnerable, so dependent on the structure my parents had built for her. Julian wasn't just after money, he was after her security, her very existence. The next piece of the puzzle came from Petra, my executive assistant. Petra was a gem, fiercely loyal, and incredibly observant. I had subtly asked her to keep an eye on Julian's interactions within the company, particularly with his executive assistant, Sandra Reeves. Sandra was brilliant, efficient, and had a master's degree in organizational psychology. I had always admired her, but now, a different picture began to emerge. Petra reported unusual late-night meetings between Julian and Sandra, hushed phone calls, and an almost conspiratorial intimacy that went beyond professional boundaries. I had always known about Sandra, not in the dramatic way of lipstick on a collar, but in the quieter, more corrosive way that comes from 6 years of small observations accumulating like sediment. The way Julian's voice changed when he spoke her name on phone calls he thought I couldn't hear. The way she had looked at me exactly once at a Sterling Group function, not with guilt, but with the cold appraisal of a woman who had already decided the outcome of a competition I didn't yet know I was in. Daniel Cross confirmed my suspicions. Sandra Reeves had a separate phone, registered to a burner account, which she used exclusively to communicate with a man named Pavel Orloof. Pavel Orloof was not an accountant or a lawyer. He was a logistics consultant, a term used in certain circles for a man who makes problems disappear. The words landed with a strange, muffled quality, like sounds underwater. Sandra had commissioned Pavel 3 weeks ago. The initial target was me. A staged accident, Daniel explained, a gas leak at the penthouse, timed for an evening when Julian had a documented alibi. December 12th was only 11 days away. My hand tightened around the brush handle I was holding in my studio, my knuckles aching. You said the initial target was me, I said slowly. forcing the words out. What changed? A pause. The kind that means the next sentence is going to be complicated. Sandra found out about the Macau debts, Daniel said. All of them. Not the $15 million Julian had managed to partially conceal. The full amount. Julian's total exposure, including the Hong Kong private lenders, is closer to $23 million. Sandra had apparently been operating under the assumption that Julian would be solvent once he acquired your assets, and the Sterling building mortgage was restructured. Another pause. She reassessed. She reassessed, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. The new target is Julian. I sat down on my studio stool, pressing the phone hard against my ear, trying to organize what I was feeling into something manageable. It was not entirely possible. There was relief, cold, shameful, immediate relief that I was no longer the one in Pavel Orloff's calendar. There was fury at the casualness of it, the transactional efficiency with which Sandra had simply redirected the order, the way you redirect a package to a new address. And beneath both of those, something more complicated, something that took me a moment to identify as grief. Not for Julian, never again for Julian, but for the version of myself that had once believed with her whole heart that she was loved. Evelyn, Daniel's voice pulled me back. I need you to focus. I'm focused, I said, my voice rough but steady. Sandra doesn't know we're watching her. Pavel doesn't know we're watching him. Julian doesn't know any of it. That gives us a window, but it's closing. He paused. Sandra will move before Christmas. She wants it done while Julian is isolated, preferably outside the city, where response times are longer. Outside the city, isolated, Christmas, Aspen. That would be her ideal scenario, I said quietly, the pieces clicking into place. Yes, Daniel confirmed, which means the Aspen invitation you've already extended to Julian is now a variable in two separate plans, ours and Sandra's. I stood up from the stool and walked to the window again, staring out at the pewter gray river below. A barge moved slowly upstream against the current, heavy and deliberate. I watched it for a moment before I spoke. Then we let Sandra believe she still has the advantage, I said. We don't alert Julian. We don't move against Pavel yet. We let everyone arrive in Aspen exactly as planned. That means Julian will be in genuine danger for a period of time, Daniel said carefully. You understand that? I understand that, I said, my jaw tightening. But Julian Sterling needs to stand in a courtroom, Daniel. He needs to answer for Clara's trust fund, for the forged mortgage, for all of it, in front of a judge, on the record, in public. If Sandra's plan succeeds, none of that happens. I am not letting him escape into a gas accident. He doesn't get that. There was a silence on the line, longer than Daniel's usual pauses. When he spoke again, his voice was different, a note of grim respect. Understood, Evelyn. What's the next step? Christmas Eve, I said. Aspen. I want everything to play out there, and I want you there too. Discreetly. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and meticulously choreographed. My Aspen home became the stage for a drama Julian never knew he was performing in. I had installed hidden cameras, bugged the study where he would undoubtedly make calls, and even set up a subtle audio feed in the dining room. Every detail was designed to capture his confession, his complicity, and Sandra's deadly intent. On December 24th, Julian arrived, looking weary but relieved to escape the city. He believed he was coming to mend our marriage, to convince me to sign over the interim CEO duties, and implicitly, control of Clara's trust. He saw me as vulnerable, broken, and ripe for manipulation. He had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. The evening began with a seemingly idyllic Christmas dinner. The large dining room, usually filled with the boisterous laughter of family holidays, felt strangely hushed. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the familiar space feel both intimate and subtly menacing. Julian, myself, and a guest I had invited, a woman I introduced as Eleanor Vance, a retired Swiss bank auditor. Eleanor was a friend of Daniel's, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman who specialized in tracking illicit funds. She was there as an observer, a witness, and a silent ally. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, though kind, missed nothing. Julian, ever the charmer, engaged Eleanor in conversation, oblivious to her true purpose. He spoke of my fragility since my parents' death, his selfless desire to protect me and the company. He even subtly hinted at the complexity of Clara's trust, implying that it needed a more experienced hand to navigate its intricacies. His voice was smooth, practiced, a performance honed over years. He gestured with his hands, his expensive watch catching the light, a picture of effortless sophistication. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally asking a pointed question that made Julian stumble, just slightly, before recovering his composure. One such question, about the specific legal precedents for temporary trustee transfers in international trusts, made a bead of sweat appear on Julian's temple, quickly wiped away with a linen napkin. The main course was served, a rich coq au vin, its aroma filling the room. The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound for a few moments, a fragile peace before the storm. As Julian raised his glass for a toast, his eyes sparkling with a false conviviality, my phone, which I had placed face down beside my plate, vibrated. It was Daniel. A single word. Now. I cleared my throat, the sound surprisingly steady. Julian, before we toast, there's something I need to discuss. About Clara's trust. His smile faltered, a crack in the polished facade. Evelyn, darling, can't this wait? It's Christmas Eve. He tried to inject a note of playful exasperation into his voice, but it fell flat. No, I said, my voice firm, cutting through the pretense. It can't. I've been reviewing the documents, and I've found some discrepancies, particularly concerning the clause about trustee incapacitation. I watched his face, the subtle shift in his eyes, the tightening around his mouth. He was beginning to understand. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation replacing his practiced charm. What discrepancies are you talking about? The tenderness was gone, replaced by a thinly veiled impatience. The ones that seemed to have been subtly altered, I replied, my voice unwavering, to make it easier for someone to claim I'm unfit to manage it. Someone, perhaps with significant gambling debts. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. The hand holding his wine glass trembled almost imperceptibly. Eleanor beside him took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze steady, observing every minute detail of Julian's unraveling. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken accusations. Evelyn, what are you talking about? He stammered, his voice losing its tender edge, a desperate tremor entering it. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape route, his eyes darting from the ornate chandelier to the heavy velvet curtains. I'm talking about Macau, Julian, and Hong Kong, and the $23 million you owe. I'm talking about the forged mortgage documents on the Sterling building, designed to funnel company assets to cover your losses. And I'm talking about your plan to declare me mentally unfit to gain control of Clara's future. Each word was a precise, surgical strike, dismantling his carefully constructed reality. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the sudden silence. He stood, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. This is insane. You're clearly not well, Evelyn. This is precisely what I was worried about. His voice was rising, a desperate attempt to regain control through bluster. Am I? I asked, a cold calm settling over me, a quiet strength that surprised even myself. Or am I simply seeing the forgery for what it is? The false varnish, the brushstroke that doesn't belong. I looked at Eleanor, a silent signal passing between us. Eleanor, perhaps you can explain to Julian what happens when a trust is illegally tampered with, especially one designed for a vulnerable beneficiary. Eleanor set her glass down with a soft click, her movements deliberate. Her gaze, when it met Julian's, was unwavering, devoid of pity. The penalties are severe, Julian. Fraud, embezzlement, potentially even elder abuse, given Clara's circumstances. And with the evidence Evelyn has compiled, it would be an open and shut case. Her voice was low, calm, but carried the weight of undeniable authority. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen countless attempts at financial deception and knew exactly how they ended. Julian's eyes darted between us, a frantic, trapped animal. Panic replaced his anger, a raw, visceral fear. Evidence? What evidence? He was breathing heavily now, his chest heaving. The polished facade had completely shattered, revealing the desperate man beneath. Just then, the front doorbell chimed. It was an unexpected sound, a jarring intrusion into the tense silence, a perfectly timed cue in the drama I had orchestrated. Julian looked at me, bewildered, his eyes wide with confusion. Who could that be? I believe, I said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. That would be Sandra, and Pavel. His jaw dropped. He looked utterly stunned, as if I had just spoken in an alien tongue. What? The single word was a choked gasp. You see, Julian, I continued, my voice steady, while you were busy trying to dismantle my life, Sandra was busy trying to dismantle yours. She found out about your true debt, realized you wouldn't be able to deliver on your promises, and decided to cut her losses. She hired Pavel to make you disappear, believing that with you gone, she could step in and seize what she thought was a clear path to the sterling assets. I watched the realization dawn in his eyes, a dawning horror that was almost satisfying to witness. The betrayal he had planned for me was now being visited upon him, a perfect, bitter irony. The door to the dining room opened, and Petra, my assistant, a picture of calm efficiency, ushered in a disheveled Sandra Reeves and a hulking man with cold, unblinking eyes, Pavel Orlov. Sandra's usually immaculate hair was slightly askew, and her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Pavel, a silent, imposing presence, scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Julian, then on me. They had expected to find Julian alone, vulnerable, perhaps even already incapacitated. They had not expected me, Eleanor, or the array of recording devices Daniel had confirmed were active, subtly hidden in the floral arrangements and the antique clock on the mantelpiece. "Merry Christmas, Sandra," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, a chilling contrast to the festive setting. "Pavel, I believe you have some explaining to do." The confrontation was swift and brutal. Pavel, realizing he had been double-crossed, his carefully constructed anonymity compromised, quickly turned on Sandra, his loyalty evaporating in an instant. He offered to cooperate in exchange for leniency, his deep voice rumbling with a surprising eagerness to save his own skin. Sandra, cornered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into a heap of desperation, lashed out at Julian, her voice shrill with fury. She revealed the full extent of their conspiracy, their shared ambition to strip me of my inheritance and Clara of her future, her words tumbling out in a torrent of bitter accusations and self-preservation. Julian, caught between two betrayers, his own lies exposed, could only stare, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. He had been so convinced of his own cleverness, so certain of my naive vulnerability. He had underestimated the woman who could see past the beautiful surface and dismantle the canvas of a ruthless betrayal. The coq au vin grew cold on the table. The festive candles burned lower, casting longer, more grotesque shadows as the truth came spilling out. By the time the police arrived, discreetly summoned by Daniel, the entire story had unfolded. The officers, accustomed to the quiet affluence of Aspen, listened with grim expressions as the layers of deceit were peeled back. Julian, Sandra, and Pavel were all taken into custody, their protests and denials hollow against the weight of the evidence. The Christmas Eve trap had sprung, catching every player in its intricate web, leaving behind only the lingering scent of pine and the bitter taste of betrayal. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Julian Sterling was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Daniel and corroborated by Eleanor's expert testimony, was overwhelming. Sandra Reeves faced similar charges, along with attempted murder, her cold calculation laid bare for the court. Pavel Orlov, true to his word, cooperated and received a reduced sentence, disappearing back into the shadows from which he had emerged. The process was agonizing, a draining ordeal that stretched over months. I sat through every hearing, every testimony, watching Julian's carefully constructed life unravel. He was no longer the charming, tender husband. He was a desperate, broken man, his true nature laid bare for the world to see. The public humiliation, the loss of his reputation, seemed to sting him more than the prospect of prison. Clara's trust was secured, the forged documents nullified. The Sterling Architecture Group weathered the storm, thanks to the swift action and the unwavering loyalty of my team, particularly Petra, who had been an invaluable asset throughout. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for the legacy my parents had built, and for Clara's future. The company, once a source of immense pride, now carried the faint echo of the battle I had waged within its walls. Months later, the dust settled. Julian was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his appeals exhausted. Sandra received a similar fate, her ambition having led her to a cold, hard cell. The world moved on, but I was irrevocably changed. The woman who had believed in Julian's love was gone, replaced by someone sharper, more discerning, and infinitely more resilient. Eleanor Vance became a close friend, a mentor. She taught me that tears are not a form of weakness. They are simply the body's way of acknowledging that something matters. And I had learned, in the crucible of betrayal, that what mattered most was truth, integrity, and the fierce protection of those you love. One evening, Eleanor came for dinner. The Manhattan penthouse felt different now, lighter, less burdened by the ghosts of the past. We ate a simple pasta dish, the clinking of forks a comfortable rhythm. "Clara called me," she said, her voice soft. "She did 3 days ago. She wanted to know about your mother. We spoke for 2 hours. She asked very good questions." Eleanor turned her wine glass slowly, watching the amber liquid swirl. "She has Margaret's mind, the good kind, the kind that comes from something expanding rather than something breaking. She's going to be all right. She's going to be considerably more than all right," Eleanor said, with the conviction of a woman who had been assessing human potential for 7 decades. "As are you." Her gaze was warm, steady, full of an unspoken understanding. After dinner, we took our wine to the window and stood looking out at Manhattan, the lights of the city spreading in every direction, a glittering tapestry of human endeavor. The city hummed with a vibrant energy, a stark contrast to the quiet of the mountains. "I've been thinking about what comes next," I said, the words feeling both tentative and resolute. "Tell me," Eleanor prompted, her voice encouraging. "I want to establish a foundation," I said, the idea having taken root and grown strong within me over the past months. "In my mother's name. For women who are being financially exploited within marriages, access to legal resources, forensic accounting support, safe documentation channels," end quote. I paused, remembering my own desperate search for answers, the feeling of being utterly alone, the things I needed and didn't know existed. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the city lights. Then she said simply, her voice imbued with a deep sense of affirmation, "Margaret would have built exactly that." I looked out at the city lights, at the thousands of lit windows, at all the lives behind them, carrying whatever they were carrying, moving through whatever they were moving through. A sense of purpose, clear and unwavering, settled over me. "Then let's make sure it exists," I said, a new chapter beginning. Standing on the deck in the golden light of Christmas morning, a year after the trap was sprung, I looked out at the vast, silent valley. The snow-covered peaks gleamed under the winter sun, a breathtaking panorama of resilience and enduring beauty. I am proud that I fought back, but my ultimate victory came with a heavy cost. Experiencing such a calculated betrayal from the man I shared my bed with for 6 years completely shattered my reality. The trust I once had in human connection, in the sanctity of marriage, was irrevocably damaged. That primal alertness, the tightening in my stomach that first Tuesday evening, was a warning I should have heeded sooner. This was not just about getting even, it was about survival and justice. It was about reclaiming my agency and protecting the innocent. I genuinely believe God gave me my restoration training for a reason, and that reason was to look past the beautiful surface and dismantle the canvas of a ruthless family betrayal before it consumed my sister's future. Execution is everything, When dealing with deep family betrayal, you must stay calm, document every detail systematically, and strike only when you have unshakable proof. Turning a blind eye only invites devastation. This wasn't a choice. It was a necessary act to protect what was left. I had to orchestrate this cold revenge because waiting for them to change would have destroyed us. Sometimes, the ultimate form of revenge is simply forcing the truth into the light, allowing it to burn away the lies and expose the darkness beneath. The scars remain, but so does the strength forged in the fire. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.